The tank that should have stayed dead. At 4:40 in the morning on January 12, 1943, somewhere along the frozen approaches west of Stalingrad, a German anti-tank crew was watching a Soviet tank they had already killed. The vehicle sat low in the snow, its hull dark against the pale ground. The night before, it had stopped near a broken fence line after taking a hit near the track. Smoke had come from the rear deck. One hatch had opened and then closed again. To the German gun crew, that had been enough. The T-34 was marked as destroyed. Another Soviet tank removed from the battlefield. Another line in a report. But before dawn, in the half-light where smoke and frost made every shape uncertain, the tank moved. Not quickly, not cleanly. It lurched. The engine coughed once, then caught again with a heavy, uneven growl. The left track dragged for a moment before finding its grip. A road wheel did not match the others. Fresh metal showed where something had been cut and bolted in place. The rear deck still carried black stains from the previous evening's fire. But the machine was alive enough to move. For the men behind the German gun shield, that was the detail that mattered. The tank was not supposed to move. It had been hit. It had stopped. It had smoked. It had been written down. In the cold logic of a battlefield report, that should have been the end of it. Yet sometime during the night, while artillery rolled over the frozen ground and the wind pushed snow through ruined buildings, Soviet mechanics had reached it. They had come with cables, tools, and parts taken from another wreck. They had worked close enough to the front to hear German machine guns. Close enough that a flare could expose them. Close enough that the same gun that had stopped the tank could kill them if it fired again. They were not trying to make the tank whole. That was the first thing Germany often misunderstood. A factory repaired a machine until it met a standard. A Soviet field crew near the front repaired a machine until it could do one more thing. Move, fire, carry men, block a road, draw a shot, survive 10 minutes longer than expected. Under the hull, the mechanics would have worked by touch as much as sight. Gloves came off because frozen fingers could not feel bolts through wool. Oil thickened in the cold. Metal burned skin. Snow turned black beneath the engine. Someone held a lamp low and shielded it with his coat. Someone listened for the sound of incoming shells. Someone cursed when a wrench slipped. There was no ceremony in it. There was only the question. Can it move before morning? By dawn, the answer was yes. The German crew watched the T-34 crawl forward through smoke and pale light, and the old belief began to crack. They had believed a knocked-out tank was a finished result. They had believed destruction could be counted cleanly. But what really happened on the Eastern Front was harder, uglier, and more dangerous. A tank could be dead in a German report and still return in the morning. And if one tank could do that, then the real question was not how many Soviet tanks Germany had knocked out. It was how many of them would stay knocked out. What Germany thought a knockout meant. German soldiers were not fools for believing what they saw. When a shell struck a tank and the tank stopped, that meant something. When smoke came from the engine compartment, when a track snapped, when the crew bailed out, when the turret stopped turning, it was natural to assume the machine had been removed from battle. In the controlled language of reports, it became a kill, a loss, a destroyed vehicle, a success. The German army had built much of its early war confidence on this kind of battlefield clarity. Identify the enemy vehicle. Engage it. Disable it. Move on. In Poland, France, and the early months of the invasion of the Soviet Union, speed and tactical skill had often rewarded that way of thinking. A broken enemy formation could become a routed enemy formation. A stopped tank could become evidence that the system was working. German anti-tank crews were trained to wait, judge distance, and fire with discipline. Panzer crews understood angles, range, and the value of the first accurate shot. Officers collected reports and tried to turn battlefield chaos into numbers that could be understood at headquarters. How many Soviet tanks destroyed? How many still operational? How much armored strength remained? On paper, this mattered enormously. Armored warfare was not only a contest of machines. It was a contest of endurance. If German forces could destroy Soviet armor faster than Soviet industry could replace it, then Soviet attacks would weaken. Their commanders would lose options. Their infantry would be forced forward without steel cover. Their counterattacks would become thinner, slower, easier to break. So when German reports listed large numbers of Soviet tanks destroyed, the numbers seemed to confirm a familiar belief. The Red Army could lose machines at a terrifying rate, but eventually quantity had to bow to destruction. The problem was hidden inside the word destroyed. A tank burning from ammunition explosion was one thing. A tank with a broken track was another. A tank abandoned temporarily under fire was not the same as a tank beyond repair. A vehicle that looked dead from 500 meters away might still contain a usable engine, road wheels, gun, fuel pump, transmission part, or armor plate. The battlefield did not divide machines into neat categories. Men did that afterward with pencils and maps. On the Eastern Front, those categories became dangerous. German observers often saw the first half of the story. The hit, the smoke, the halt, the crew scrambling away. What they did not always see was what happened after dark. When Soviet recovery teams moved forward with tractors, cables, sledges, crowbars, spare track links, and the stubborn patience of men who had no better option. A German gun crew might leave a disabled T-34 in a field and assume it would remain there. A Soviet mechanic might look at the same machine and see a repair job. Or, if not a repair job, then a supply depot made of steel. This was where belief and reality began to separate. Germany believed that tactical damage produced permanent reduction. Soviet repair practice turned some of that damage into delay. Not always. Not magically. Many tanks were truly destroyed. Many burned too completely to return. Many crews died inside them. Many vehicles were lost forever in mud, snow, fire, and retreat. But enough did come back to matter. Enough returned with patched tracks, scarred armor, rough welds, missing radios, damaged optics, and engines that sounded wrong but still turned. Enough came back to confuse estimates, frustrate commanders, and force German troops to fight machines they thought had already been removed. The Germans were counting what had stopped. The Soviets were asking what could still be made useful. And in a war where hours mattered, that difference could change the meaning of a battlefield. The hidden army beneath the armor. The famous images of armored war usually show tanks moving forward. A turret turning. A gun firing. Infantry crouched behind the hull. Tracks biting into snow or mud. Commanders standing half-exposed in open hatches. Faces dark with smoke and cold. These are the images that survive because they look like battle. But beneath that visible war was another one. It happened under torn canvas, inside ruined barns, beside frozen roads, behind shattered factory walls, and in shallow depressions where men tried to work without being seen. It smelled of oil, wet wool, burnt paint, and metal filings. It sounded like hammer blows, coughing engines, shouted orders, and the dull scrape of track links dragged over frozen ground. This was the world of Soviet repair crews. They were mechanics, fitters, welders, drivers, recovery men, electricians, and soldiers who had learned machines through exhaustion. Some had worked in factories before the war. Some had been trained quickly because the front needed them. Some were barely older than the tank crews they served. Their uniforms did not stay clean long. Their hands were often cut, burned, or black with grease that no amount of snow could wash away. They did not look like the center of armored warfare. That was exactly why they mattered. A tank battalion could have brave crews and good orders, but courage did not replace a broken track. A commander could demand movement, but a seized engine would not obey rank. A plan on a map could require 20 tanks at dawn. The repair crews might know that only 13 would start unless they worked through the night. They saw the war differently from commanders. A commander saw strength as numbers ready for attack. A mechanic saw strength as a question of parts, time, tools, and weather. A German officer saw a knocked-out T-34 and thought of reduced Soviet power. A Soviet mechanic saw whether the suspension had survived, whether the gun breech was intact, whether the engine could be coaxed back, whether the vehicle could be towed, stripped, patched, or used as a donor. This was not romantic work. It was often grim. Sometimes a damaged tank still held the bodies of its crew. Sometimes ammunition remained inside, unstable after fire or impact. Sometimes recovery had to happen under enemy observation. Sometimes a tractor sent forward to pull one tank back became a target itself. A cable snapped. A shell landed short. A man vanished into smoke. And still the work continued. The Eastern Front punished anything too delicate, too slow, or too dependent on perfect conditions. Mud swallowed wheels. Snow locked tracks. Engines froze. Fuel thickened. Tools broke. Spare parts vanished into the needs of other units. What could not be supplied had to be improvised. What could not be repaired properly had to be repaired enough. That word, enough, belonged to the repair crews. Enough armor to survive a few hits from fragments. Enough engine power to cross a field. Enough turret movement to fire in one direction. Enough track tension to reach the assembly point. Enough life left in a damaged machine to make the enemy react. They were not behind the war. They were inside its machinery. And the closer the fighting came, the clearer the truth became. The front line was not only where soldiers fired rifles and tanks fired guns. It was wherever men were still trying to keep combat power alive. Germany learned to fear Soviet tanks. It understood their armor, their numbers, their simplicity, their stubborn presence in places German commanders hoped would be empty. But it was slower to understand the men beneath the armor, the men who made sure that destruction did not always stay final. And those men were about to push repair work closer to battle than theory said it should go. The front line had no rear. In military diagrams, the front line looks simple. There is the zone of combat. Behind it, support. Behind that, supply. Farther back, workshops, depots, hospitals, railheads, command posts. Everything has a place. Everything has distance. A damaged tank should move rearward through the system until it reaches the level of repair it needs. The Eastern Front did not respect diagrams. A village that was safe at dawn could be under shellfire by noon. A road marked usable on a map could become a ribbon of mud by afternoon. A bridge could vanish in the night. Snow could cover mines. A German counterattack could cut the route between a damaged tank and the workshop meant to receive it. The rear was not always behind the front. Sometimes it was beside it. Sometimes the front passed over it entirely. This mattered because tanks broke constantly. Not only from enemy fire. They broke from distance, weather, bad roads, overuse, rushed maintenance, and the simple violence of moving heavy steel through a broken landscape. Tracks wore out. Wheels cracked. Engines overheated or froze. Clutches failed. Turrets jammed. Fuel lines leaked. Batteries died in the cold. A tank that survived combat might still be useless by evening. In another kind of war, perhaps it could wait. On the Eastern Front, waiting could mean losing the next attack. Soviet commanders often needed damaged vehicles back quickly, because tomorrow's plan did not care that yesterday's battle had been expensive. A tank army, a brigade, or a battalion might be ordered forward again before repair crews had slept. The pressure moved downward through the system until it reached men holding wrenches in the dark. Get it moving. That was the order, spoken or unspoken. The repair crews had to choose what mattered. A perfect repair was rarely possible. A complete inspection was a luxury. A damaged radio might be ignored if the engine worked. A cracked plate might be left alone if the vehicle was not expected to survive long. A turret problem might be tolerated if the gun could fire forward. The machine was judged not by factory standards, but by battlefield need. This created a strange geography of war. A repair point might be a barn with half its roof gone. A line of trees beside a frozen road. A courtyard behind a ruined school. A railway siding. A depression in the ground covered with canvas and branches. Men worked while artillery sounded near enough to make tools tremble. They learned to pause when incoming shells approached, then return to the same bolt after the explosion. The danger was not dramatic every minute. Sometimes it was worse than that. It was routine. A mechanic could spend hours under a tank knowing that one flare, one aircraft, one ranging shot, one patrol, or one spark near spilled fuel could end everything. He could hear the battle but not see it. He could feel it through the ground, through the metal above him, through the sudden silence of men who had been talking a moment before. German doctrine still imagined a division between fighting units and service units. Every army did. It had to. But reality kept dragging Soviet repair crews toward the sound of guns. And as they moved forward, they changed the rhythm of armored combat. German troops could damage Soviet tanks. They could stop attacks. They could fill fields with wreckage. But if they did not hold the ground, if they did not destroy the vehicles completely, if they did not prevent recovery after dark, then some of that wreckage might not remain wreckage. The night belonged to men with cables. A tank that stopped in the evening could be gone by morning, pulled back, stripped, patched, reassigned, returned. The field that German observers had read as proof of success became, for Soviet repair units, a hard and dangerous inventory. The German army believed the front line was where fire was exchanged. What really happened was that the front line followed the damaged machines backward, into mud, snow, barns, workshops, and the hands of men trying to make steel breathe again. And soon, an idea that looked reckless from a distance became unavoidable. Do not wait for the tank to reach the workshop. Bring the workshop to the tank. Fix it here. A German officer looking across a battlefield after an armored clash might see waste. Burned hulls, broken tracks, wheels blown loose, turrets frozen at odd angles, shell cases scattered in the mud, a tank lying nose down in a ditch, another with its side blackened by fire, another sitting silently with one hatch open. To Soviet repair crews, the same field could look different. Not safe, never safe, but useful. One wreck might have a road wheel that still turned. Another might have track links. A third might have a gun part, a hatch, a fuel pump, a section of armor plate, tools left inside, or electrical components that had somehow survived fire and impact. A vehicle too damaged to fight could still help another vehicle return. This was the logic of cannibalization. Ugly word. Accurate word. The Soviet war machine was often praised for production. Factories moved east, T-34s built in huge numbers, simplified designs, relentless output. But production alone did not explain what happened near the front. Between factory and battlefield existed a brutal middle world where damaged machines were not simply replaced. They were harvested. The idea could look ridiculous. Take parts from one destroyed tank to revive another damaged tank. Patch armor in the field. Use rough welds. Replace clean factory order with practical disorder. Send a vehicle back with mismatched wheels, missing equipment, a tired engine, or a turret that did not feel right. To an engineer with time, it was unacceptable. To a mechanic near the front, it was Tuesday night. Because the question was not whether the tank was good. The question was whether it could still matter. That distinction shaped everything. A tank did not have to be restored to original condition to alter a battle. It could be used as mobile cover. It could carry infantry across open ground. Could force a German gun to fire early. Could block a road. It could make noise, throw smoke, and create uncertainty. It could give a commander one more option at a moment when options were disappearing. The T-34 helped make this possible. It was not a perfect tank, and it had serious limitations depending on model, crew training, optics, ergonomics, and communications. But it was rugged, relatively simple, and built for mass war. Its design allowed field crews, under terrible conditions, to do things that would have been harder with more delicate machines. Verify. Specific repairability comparisons by model and year. German armored vehicles, especially later in the war, could be formidable. Their guns were dangerous. Their optics and crew training could be excellent. But complexity had a cost. A machine that performed well when maintained properly could become a burden when parts, time, fuel, and recovery capacity failed. The Soviets often accepted imperfection because the battlefield demanded it. A rough weld was not a failure if it held long enough. A noisy engine was not a failure if it started. A missing radio was not ideal, but a silent tank that moved with hand signals was better than no tank at all. There is a kind of harsh intelligence in that. Not brilliance in the clean, polished sense. Something colder, more practical. A willingness to ask what could be done with what remained, rather than mourn what had been lost. For the men doing the work, the idea was dangerous. Repairing close to the front meant the enemy could return before the job was finished. It meant tools had to be gathered quickly. It meant some decisions could not be checked. It meant men might send a tank forward knowing it was still wounded. And yet, the alternative was worse. Leave it. Lose it. Wait for replacement. Give the enemy time. So they fixed it there. In snow. In mud. In darkness. Under canvas. Under fire. Germany had trained to destroy tanks. It had trained well. But it had not fully understood what it meant to face an army that treated wreckage not as an ending, but as material. The next test would come not in theory, but at dawn, when repaired tanks, still bearing the scars of yesterday's battle, moved forward again. The test under fire. Before an attack, a tank assembly area has its own kind of silence. It is not peace. It is waiting. Engines idle low. Men speak in short sentences. A commander moves from vehicle to vehicle with a map folded in his hand. Infantry gather behind the tanks, stamping their feet against the cold, pretending not to watch the mechanics still working. Somewhere beyond the dark, German guns are already laid on likely approaches. Now imagine that several of the tanks in that assembly area should not be there. One has a newly fitted section of track taken from a burned vehicle. One has armor patched where a shell fragment tore through thin metal. One has an engine that runs too hot. Another can move, but only if the driver treats the clutch gently. The crews know it. The mechanics know it. The officers know it too, though they may not say so aloud. The first light, orders arrive. Move. The tanks begin forward in uneven sequence. Snow crushes under the tracks. Exhaust hangs low. A machine with a damaged suspension rocks harder than the others. Inside, the driver feels every jolt through his arms. The commander's view is narrow, broken by frost and smoke. The gunner waits, cramped and tense, knowing the first German shot may arrive before he sees anything clearly. Behind them, infantry follow. This is where the repaired tank proves its value. Not by being perfect. Not by winning a duel like a machine in a weapons manual, but by existing at the moment the enemy did not expect it. German observers have already estimated Soviet strength from the previous day's fighting. They have seen vehicles stopped. They have counted smoke columns. They have watched crews bail out. They expect fewer tanks now. They expect a weakened push. Then the silhouettes appear. More than expected. Some are scarred. Some move badly. Some look like they should have stayed behind. But from the German side of the field, that distinction may not matter. A damaged T-34 that is still advancing must be engaged. A tank with rough repairs can still draw fire. A machine that survives only long enough to cross open ground can still protect infantry for the minutes that count. A German gun commander faces a choice. Fire early and reveal the position, or wait and risk the tank getting closer. If he fires, Soviet artillery may answer. If he waits, infantry may reach cover. One repaired tank has forced a decision. That is combat power. Not the clean kind found in charts, but the dirty kind found in timing. The first shell cracks across the field. Snow jumps near the lead vehicle. Another shot strikes metal with a sound that carries strangely in the cold. A repaired tank stops, then starts again. Behind it, infantry scatter, then reform. A German gun flashes from a tree line. Soviet observers mark it. Somewhere behind the attack, a battery receives the correction. The tank may not survive, but it has already done something. This was the mathematics German reports struggled to capture. A repaired vehicle did not need to become a long-term asset to matter. It only needed to appear at the wrong moment for the enemy. It only needed to force a shot, delay a counterattack, carry men forward, or create the impression that Soviet armored strength was not collapsing as expected. After the attack, the field may again hold wrecks. Some repaired tanks will be destroyed for good. Some will burn. Some crews will not return. Some vehicles will be dragged back again if the ground can be held. The cycle does not end neatly, but from the German perspective, something has changed. Yesterday's battlefield damage did not produce today's weakness in the way they expected. And if that pattern repeats across days, weeks, and operations, then German tactical success begins to lose some of its strategic meaning. They can knock out Soviet tanks, but can they keep them out of the war? The reality Germany learned too late. The reversal did not happen in one dramatic moment. No German commander suddenly looked across a battlefield and understood the entire Soviet repair system in a flash. War rarely grants that kind of clarity. Understanding arrived slowly, through frustration, through reports that did not match what units faced, through the repeated shock of seeing Soviet armor return after losses that should have weakened it more severely. German troops remained dangerous. Their anti-tank guns killed. Their panzers killed. Their crews were often skilled, disciplined, and experienced. Nothing about Soviet repair crews made tanks invincible. No field mechanic could undo a catastrophic ammunition fire. No recovery tractor could save a vehicle trapped under enemy control. No rough weld could erase the cost of poor tactics, bad orders, or overwhelming fire. But the German problem was not that Soviet tanks could not be destroyed. The problem was that destruction did not always behave as expected. At the tactical level, a German unit could have a good day, could stop an attack, knock out several tanks, hold a position, and report success. But at the operational level, Soviet systems were working to reduce the lasting value of that success. Recovery teams moved after dark. Repair crews sorted damage. Workshops triaged vehicles. Rear depots rebuilt what field units could not. Factories sent replacements. Damaged units absorbed, reformed, and returned. The German army saw the first impact. The Soviet system managed the aftermath. This difference mattered more as the war became a contest of attrition. Germany needed battlefield victories to produce lasting reductions in Soviet strength. It needed destroyed tanks to remain destroyed. It needed Soviet losses to translate into operational weakness. Instead, German forces often faced a Red Army that absorbed punishment and returned pressure faster than expected. Part of that was industry. Part of it was manpower. Part of it was command ruthlessness. Part of it was geography, Allied aid, rail movement, and the relocation of Soviet production eastward. But near the front, in the mud and snow, part of it was simpler. Men kept fixing machines. They did it badly sometimes. Hastily. Dangerously. They made mistakes. They sent out tanks that should have stayed back. They worked beyond exhaustion. But the cumulative effect was real. Germany had believed that the visible battlefield told the whole story. A field of stopped tanks looked like victory. It often was victory locally. But it was not always the permanent victory German commanders needed. Because after the guns stopped, another battle began. The battle for engines, tracks, transmissions, parts, recovery routes, tow cables, fuel, and time. This was the battle Soviet repair crews could win without appearing in German sights. And when enough of those small battles were won, the larger war changed shape. Soviet attacks kept coming. Armored formations regained strength. Vehicles returned with scars from previous engagements. German soldiers began to understand that the enemy's capacity to recover was itself a weapon. Not a weapon that fired. A weapon that continued. That is a harder thing to measure. It has no single muzzle flash, no famous duel, no clean photograph. It is seen in the disappointment of an enemy commander whose estimates fail. In the fatigue of gun crews forced to fight again. In the growing realization that yesterday's destruction has not bought as much time as it should have. Germany had mastered many forms of battlefield violence. But on the Eastern Front, it faced an enemy that treated survival after violence as part of combat. By the time that truth became unavoidable, the war had already become exactly the kind Germany could not afford. A grinding contest where recovery, repair, replacement, and endurance mattered as much as tactical brilliance. And to see why, you have to look at the numbers, not as cold statistics but as minutes bought with oil, steel, and human hands. The mathematics of survival. A repaired tank did not have to survive the war. It did not even have to survive the day. That may sound strange until you think like a battlefield commander with too few options. If a damaged tank could be returned for one attack, one crossing, one defensive stand, 1 hour of movement, it might still matter. War is often decided in intervals too small to look impressive afterward. 5 minutes before a gun reveals itself. 10 minutes for infantry to cross open ground. 30 minutes to block a road. 1 hour to delay a counterattack. A tank that survives only that long can still change decisions around it. This is the math that kill counts conceal. A destroyed vehicle is easy to mark. A delayed enemy response is harder. A gun position forced to fire early may not appear in a simple tank loss table. Infantry who reach a ditch because a patched T-34 drew fire do not show up as a mechanical statistic. A German commander who hesitates because Soviet armor appears stronger than expected leaves no neat number behind. But those effects accumulate. Suppose a unit loses 10 tanks in a fight. If all 10 are permanently gone, the unit's next action is shaped by absence. If 3 can be recovered quickly, 2 more repaired later, and several stripped for parts, the battlefield meaning of those losses changes. The unit is still hurt. Men are still dead. Machines are still ruined. But the system has converted some destruction into usable time. That was one of the Soviet advantages. Not that losses did not matter, but that some losses were processed aggressively. Repair crews created a second chance for machines that had already entered the German count of success. Even when a tank did not return whole, its parts might. This meant that the wreckage of battle fed the next repair cycle. There is a brutal honesty in that system. Nothing wasted because too much was needed. The German army had its own repair and recovery services, and they were often highly skilled. But as the war moved against Germany, shortages, distance, fuel problems, Allied bombing, retreat, and vehicle complexity made recovery harder. A damaged German tank abandoned during retreat might be lost not because it could not theoretically be repaired, but because there was no time, fuel, tractor, spare part, or secure route to recover it. Maintainability is not glamorous. It does not dominate propaganda posters. It does not sound heroic in a headline. But a weapon's value is not only what it can do when new. It is what can be done with it after damage. The Soviet repair crews lived inside that truth. They understood that a machine's battlefield life could be extended in fragments. A tank might fight, be damaged, be recovered, fight again, lose parts to another vehicle, and finally disappear into the machinery of war. Its story was not a straight line from factory to battlefield to destruction. It was circulation. German estimates struggled with this because battlefield observation is always incomplete. Smoke hides, night hides, withdrawal hides, reports simplify. A vehicle hit and stopped may be recorded one way by the men who fired and another way by the army that later recovered it. What matters is not only the exact number. Verify. Use verified Soviet/German repair recovery statistics if available during final production. What matters is what the numbers reveal. In a war of machines, repair speed becomes combat speed. Recovery capacity becomes armored strength. A mechanic's night work becomes a commander's morning option, and options decide battles. That is why one repaired tank could matter even if it was ugly, loud, and temporary. It made the enemy react. It changed a calculation. It bought time in a war where time was paid for in blood. But those minutes were not free. They were purchased by men working where no one wanted to be, under damaged steel beside leaking fuel while the front breathed fire around them. The men who paid in oil, fire, and silence. There is a danger in telling stories about repair crews as if they simply solved problems. A broken track. Clever mechanic. A tank returns. The story feels satisfying. The real thing was heavier. A damaged tank is not a puzzle on a clean floor. It is a cramped, burned, unstable place where men may have died minutes or hours before. The metal can still be hot. Ammunition may still be inside. Fuel may be leaking. The engine compartment may be filled with smoke. The hull may smell of oil, explosive residue, wet clothing, and something no one wants to name. To repair that machine, someone had to approach it. Sometimes under fire. Sometimes at night, sometimes knowing that the Germans had already ranged the area and might fire again at the first sound of movement. The men who did this work carried a different kind of fear from tank crews. Tank crews feared the hit. Repair crews often arrived after the hit and had to touch what it had done. They had to climb over bent armor, reach into damaged compartments, remove broken parts, and sometimes work around the absence left by men they knew. A wrench slips. A hand opens on sharp metal. A glove catches fire from a torch. Frostbite numbs fingers until pain comes later. Exhaust gathers under canvas. A shell lands close enough to throw dirt across the tools. Someone keeps working because stopping means the tank will not move by dawn. No one calls it bravery in the moment. They call it work. That may be the most honest part. The Soviet mechanic did not need to imagine himself as a hero. He had an order, a machine, and too little time. He knew the punishment for failure might be formal, but he also knew the battlefield punishment would come first. If the tank did not move, infantry might attack without it. If it did not start, a road might remain open to German armor. If it stayed where it was, the enemy might recover the ground and destroy it completely. So he reached for the tool again. There were moral weights inside this labor too. A mechanic could repair a tank knowing another crew would climb into it and perhaps die. He could patch a machine whose previous crew had burned inside. He could make it move without making it safe. War narrowed choices until every option carried guilt. The tank crew felt it as well. Imagine being ordered into a vehicle that had already been hit. The armor shows scars. The smell is wrong. The engine knocks. The repair crew says it will run. Not perfectly, but enough. You climb in because there is no spare tank waiting behind you. You trust the men who worked through the night, not because they promise survival, but because they have given you motion. Motion is everything. For German soldiers facing these machines, the human cost was mostly invisible. They saw silhouettes, muzzle flashes, tracks, smoke. They did not see the burned hands that had reconnected the fuel line. They did not see the mechanic sleeping for 20 minutes against a wheel before another vehicle arrived. They did not see the fear in the repair point when aircraft passed overhead. And history often followed the same pattern. It remembered the tank more easily than the hands. The T-34 became a symbol. The battles became maps. The commanders became names. But the repair crews remained blurred in the background, bent over engines, half hidden by steam and smoke. Yet the war passed through them. Every repaired tank carried their labor forward. Every patched hull was a trace of someone who had worked when the machine should have been abandoned. Every vehicle that returned to the line asked the same quiet question. How much of combat power is created after the battle seems over? The reports would eventually offer part of the answer. But reports have their own silence. They can count vehicles returned to service. They can record maintenance. They can praise efficiency. What they often fail to hold is the sound of a man breathing under a tank while artillery walks closer. Recognition written in reports, not monuments. Military institutions learn slowly, and often through damage. By the later years of the war, every serious army understood that repair and recovery were not secondary details. They were part of combat power. A formation strength was not simply how many tanks it had received from factories, but how many could be made operational tomorrow morning. The difference between those numbers could decide whether an attack happened at all. Soviet commanders, through necessity, treated repair as an urgent battlefield function. Damaged vehicles moved through layers of attention. Immediate field fixes, unit workshops, larger repair facilities, and rear depots when time and distance allowed. The system was imperfect, strained, and often brutal, but it reflected a clear truth. A tank returned to service was cheaper and faster than a tank replaced from scratch. German commanders came to understand the enemy's resilience in pieces. A report might note that Soviet armored formations retained strength despite heavy losses. A frontline officer might complain that tanks believed destroyed had reappeared. Intelligence summaries might adjust assumptions. Maintenance officers on both sides understood things that combat narratives often missed. The battle did not end when the firing stopped. It continued in repair parks, recovery routes, spare parts dumps, and workshops. But recognition did not mean fame. The men doing the work rarely became legends. They were not usually named in broad histories. They did not fit the clean image of battlefield heroism. They did not stand in turrets for photographs or command armies across maps. Their victories were measured in engines restarted, tracks replaced, vehicles towed back, guns made usable, parts salvaged before the enemy advanced. Many of them disappeared into records. A maintenance line, a unit diary, a repair total, A note that so many vehicles were returned to service within a given period. Verify. Insert specific Soviet armored repair report examples if available. That kind of recognition is real but cold. Tells us the work mattered. It does not tell us how it felt. It does not show the mechanic with swollen fingers trying to thread a bolt in the dark. It does not show the driver waiting beside a damaged tank, ashamed that he survived when others did not. It does not show the repair crew listening to German artillery and deciding whether to keep working or run for cover. Official history likes clean lines because clean lines can be taught. Combat troops fight. Logistics support. Factories produce. Commanders decide. The Eastern Front blurred those lines until they almost disappeared. A repair crew close to the front could influence tomorrow's attack as surely as a rifle platoon holding a trench. A recovered tank could become the difference between retreat and delay, between a German gun remaining hidden and being forced to fire. Still, the monuments went elsewhere. To armies, to victories, to commanders, to famous machines. The repair crews remained in the shadow of the vehicles they saved. Perhaps that is why their story matters. Not because they alone decided the war. They did not. But because they reveal something essential about modern war that heroic narratives often hide. Battles are not only won by the moment of impact. They are shaped by what happens afterward. Who recovers? Who repairs? Who returns? Germany learned that truth under pressure, and too late to turn it into an advantage. The Soviet system had made repair part of the front, whether or not the enemy fully saw it. The legacy would outlast the war. Because after the Eastern Front, no serious army could pretend that the strongest weapon was simply the one with the thickest armor or the largest gun. The strongest weapon was the one that could still be made useful after war had tried to break it. The legacy of the moving wreck. After the war, armored warfare did not become simpler. Machines grew heavier, faster, more complex. Engines changed. Communications improved. Recovery vehicles became more specialized. Maintenance systems became more formal. Armies studied not only how tanks fought, but how they failed, how they were recovered, and how quickly damaged formations could regain strength. The Eastern Front had made the lesson impossible to ignore. A tank is not only a gun, armor, and engine. It is a relationship between design, crew, maintenance, supply, doctrine, terrain, and time. Remove any one of those and the machine begins to lose meaning. A powerful tank that cannot be recovered may become a monument to wasted strength. A simpler tank that can be repaired under pressure may remain dangerous long after it should have vanished from the fight. This does not mean simple is always better. War does not reward slogans. A crude machine can fail. Complex machine can dominate. Training, tactics, production, supply, and command all matter. But the Soviet experience showed that maintainability could be as decisive as battlefield performance. The ability to repair a vehicle quickly with limited tools in terrible conditions near the front became part of its real combat value. Germany had produced extraordinary weapons and skilled crews. But as the war turned, many German advantages were dragged down by shortages, overextension, fuel crises, transportation problems, and the difficulty of keeping complex machines fighting under collapsing conditions. A tank that could win a duel still had to survive the campaign. It had to be fueled, moved, repaired, recovered, and supplied. The Soviets did not solve these problems perfectly. No army did, but they built a culture of endurance around them. They accepted ugly repairs. They used wreckage. They moved workshops forward. They treated damaged machines as temporary problems when possible, not automatic endings. And in doing so, they made the battlefield less predictable for the enemy. That is the legacy of the moving wreck. A tank scarred by yesterday's battle appears again today. Not new, not clean, not invulnerable, but present. Presence matters. In war, being there at the decisive minute can matter more than being perfect in theory. A vehicle that arrives late and flawless may be less useful than one that arrives damaged but on time. A machine that gives commanders one more option can have value far beyond its mechanical condition. This is a lesson modern armies still understand. Recovery vehicles are not afterthoughts. Maintenance units are not mere background. Spare parts, repair doctrine, mechanic training, evacuation routes, and battlefield recovery are all part of combat readiness. War breaks machines. The side that returns them faster keeps more choices alive. The Soviet repair crews of the Eastern Front lived that truth before it became doctrine in manuals. They did not write it elegantly. They wrote it in oil, welds, track pins, frozen bolts, and sleepless nights. And when German soldiers saw a tank they thought destroyed moving again through smoke, they were seeing more than a repaired vehicle. They were seeing a system of war they had underestimated. A system that turned damage into delay, delay into time, time into pressure, and pressure into survival. The story began with a tank that should not have moved. But by the end, the tank itself is almost less important than the hands that made it move. Those hands are where the final truth waits. What they believed, what really happened. Return to the frozen field outside Stalingrad. The light is still low. The air is gray. Snow has hardened over the tracks from the night before. Somewhere behind the German position, a man is trying to make sense of what he sees through binoculars. The Soviet tank is moving again. It is not beautiful. It is not a symbol yet. It is a damaged machine, patched in the dark by tired men who probably did not know their work would ever be remembered. The engine note is uneven. The hull is scarred. The repair is visible if you know where to look. Carries no promise of survival. But it moves. That was enough to disturb a belief. Germany had believed a knocked-out tank was a clean result. Hit it, stop it, count it, move on. In many cases, that belief was reasonable. In many cases, it was true. A burned tank with dead crewmen inside did not return. A vehicle shattered beyond use could not be saved by courage or skill. But on the Eastern Front, the space between damaged and destroyed was wider than Germany wanted it to be. Inside that space worked men history often left unnamed. They were not the faces of propaganda. They did not fit neatly into stories of tank aces, generals, and famous offensives. They were mechanics under hulls, recovery crews on exposed roads, welders in ruined barns, soldiers who could hear the battle but were ordered to keep their eyes on the machine in front of them. They changed the meaning of loss. Not always, not completely, never without cost, but often enough. A tank Germany counted as gone could become spare parts. A vehicle abandoned in smoke could be pulled back after dark. A damaged machine could return for one more attack. A patched T-34 could force a German gun to reveal itself. A repaired engine could buy an hour. And in war, an hour can be a lifetime. This is what Germany realized too late. The front line was not only made of riflemen, tank crews, and artillery observers. It also included the men who kept combat power from dying after the first blow. The men who understood that survival did not begin after battle. It was part of battle. War is often remembered through explosions. But sometimes the decisive sound is smaller. A wrench on a frozen bolt. A cable tightening in the dark. An engine coughing once, failing, then catching. They believed Soviet tanks died when German guns stopped them. But what really happened was that some of those tanks entered another fight. A quieter fight, fought under smoke and snow, by men with burned hands and no time to be afraid. And when those tanks moved again, they carried more than armor back to the front. They carried the truth Germany had not wanted to see. A machine is not finished when it is hit. Not if someone is still willing to crawl beneath it. If the story reached you, leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if someone in your family served during the war, in combat, in repair, in factories, in hospitals, or in any of the quiet places history often forgets, share their story below. Subscribe to Warfront Archive for more World War II documentaries about what they believed, what really happened, and the people who stood in the gap between the two.